James Wilson sighed as his video call froze for the third time that morning. The spinning wheel on his screen mocked him as he waited for his internet to catch up. He'd only moved into Oakwood Apartments 2 weeks ago, and the internet had been acting up since day one. At first, he chalked it up to the usual hassles of moving, but now it was starting to affect his work. "This isn't right," he muttered, opening his laptop's network settings. His connection showed full bars, yet websites loaded at a snail's pace. As a software engineer who worked from home, reliable internet wasn't just a convenience, it was essential. James ran a quick speed test. The results confirmed his suspicions. His download speed was crawling at a fraction of what he was paying for. Odd, considering he had signed up for the premium package specifically to avoid these issues. He decided to check his router settings. After typing the IP address into his browser, he logged into the admin panel. What he saw made him sit up straight. What the? His eyes widened as he scrolled through the list of connected devices. Besides his own laptop, phone, and smart TV, there were 4 other devices he didn't recognize. Kitchen iPhone, living room iPad, HP laptop, and something called Baby Monitor 2000. James ran his hand over his short-cropped hair in confusion. He lived alone. These weren't his devices. Someone was using his Wi-Fi without permission. The realization hit him like a bucket of cold water. No wonder his internet was so slow. He was sharing his bandwidth with an entire household of devices. But how? He hadn't given his password to anyone. Then he remembered the router came pre-installed by the apartment management, with a generic password printed on a sticker underneath. James felt a flicker of annoyance. Someone, likely a neighbor, had simply looked at the default password and helped themselves to his internet. Not only was this rude, but it also posed a serious security risk. Anyone on the same network could potentially access his personal files or monitor his online activity. Without hesitation, James changed the Wi-Fi password to something complex and unique. He also renamed his network from the default apt 403 to Private Network Do Not Connect. For good measure, he enabled network encryption and disabled the option to broadcast the network name. "There," he said with satisfaction as he applied the changes. The router restarted, and James watched as the list of connected devices dropped from 7 to just his 3. His speed test now showed the full bandwidth he was paying for. With his internet security restored, James returned to his work call, which now ran smoothly without interruptions. The rest of his afternoon was productive, and he almost forgot about the Wi-Fi incident, until a sharp knock on his door broke his concentration. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. James glanced at his watch. It was nearly 6 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he found a woman standing in the hallway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She appeared to be in her mid-40s with highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her lips were pressed into a thin line and her foot tapped impatiently on the carpet. "Can I help you?" James asked politely, though he had no idea who she was. "Yes, you can," the woman said, her voice clipped. "I need you to fix whatever you did to the internet. I have an important Zoom meeting in 15 minutes and suddenly I can't connect." James blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't done anything to your internet." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb with me. The internet was working fine until today. Then you moved in and now it's not working. Fix it." "Ma'am, I've been here for 2 weeks already," James explained calmly. "And I only changed my own Wi-Fi password this afternoon because I noticed unauthorized devices using my network." "That's my network," she insisted, her voice rising. "It's the building's internet." "Everyone uses it," James shook his head. "No, that's not correct. Each apartment has its own separate internet service. It's in the lease agreement. You should have your own router and your own connection." The woman's face flushed red. "Listen, I've lived here for 3 years. I know how things work in this building. The internet has always been shared." "I'm afraid that's not true," James said, maintaining his composure despite the woman's increasing hostility. "I signed up and paid for my own internet service when I moved in, just like everyone else is supposed to do." "You're lying," she snapped. "And now you're trying to block me from using the internet that I've always had." "This is discrimination." James took a deep breath. "I'm not discriminating against anyone. I'm simply securing my own personal network that I pay for. If you need internet, you should contact the service provider to set up your own account. The woman's eyes widened with indignation. Are you seriously suggesting I've been stealing internet? Do you know who I am? I'm Karen Stevenson, the head of the building's tenant association. Nice to meet you, Miss Stevenson, James replied evenly. I'm James Wilson. And yes, if you've been using my network without permission, that would technically be considered unauthorized use of services. Karen's face contorted with rage. How dare you accuse me? You know what? I don't have time for this. You have 5 minutes to fix the internet, or I'm calling the police. Please, let's be reasonable, James began. But Karen had already stormed off toward her apartment, which James now realized was directly across the hall from his. He closed his door, stunned by the bizarre encounter. Surely she wouldn't actually call the police over this. That would be absurd. 20 minutes later, as James was preparing dinner, another knock came at his door, harder and more official sounding than before. When he opened it, he found himself facing 2 police officers with Karen standing behind them, a triumphant look on her face. Officers? James asked, genuinely confused. Sir, we received a call about a possible cybercrime at this address, the taller officer explained. Mind if we ask you a few questions? James's mouth fell open in disbelief. A cybercrime? You can't be serious. The complainant states that you've been tampering with the building's internet and blocking other residents from accessing it. The officer continued, gesturing toward Karen. That's him, Karen interjected, pointing at James. He admitted to changing the password and cutting off my access. He's probably hacking into people's devices too. James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. As a black man, he was all too aware of how quickly situations involving police could escalate, even when based on misunderstandings or false accusations. He knew he needed to stay calm and clear. Officers, I'd be happy to explain the situation, he said, keeping his voice steady. There seems to be a misunderstanding about how internet service works in this building. The officers glanced at each other, then back at James. May we come in, sir? James nodded and stepped aside, allowing the officers into his apartment. Karen tried to follow, but the second officer held up his hand. Ma'am, please wait out here while we speak with Mr. Wilson. Karen's mouth opened in protest, but the officer's firm look silenced her. With a huff, she remained in the hallway as James closed the door. Inside, James showed the officers his internet bill, the router that belonged to him, and explained how he had discovered unknown devices using his network without permission. So you're saying that Ms. Stevenson has been connecting to your Wi-Fi without authorization? The shorter officer clarified. Based on the device names I saw and her reaction when I changed the password, yes, that appears to be the case, James replied. I didn't know it was her specifically until she came to my door demanding I fix the internet. The taller officer nodded thoughtfully. And each apartment is supposed to have its own separate internet service? Yes, James confirmed. It's mentioned in the lease agreement. I can show you mine if you'd like. That won't be necessary, the officer said. We'll need to speak with Ms. Stevenson to get her side of the story. But I want to be clear. You haven't done anything wrong by securing your own network. James felt relief wash over him. At least the officers seemed reasonable and were taking the time to understand the situation. When they opened the door, Karen was pacing the hallway, phone in hand. She looked up expectantly. Well, are you arresting him? She demanded. Miss Stevenson, we need to talk, the shorter officer said firmly. Mr. Wilson has provided evidence that he pays for his own internet service, and that you may have been using his network without permission. Karen's face paled slightly before flushing an even deeper shade of red. That's ridiculous. I wouldn't. Ma'am, unauthorized use of internet services can actually be considered a form of theft, the officer continued. Do you have your own internet account with a service provider? Karen's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish out of water. Finally, she sputtered. Well, no, but that's because the building provides it. Everyone knows that. According to the lease agreement, that's not the case, James said quietly. Each tenant is responsible for their own utilities, including internet. The look Karen gave him could have melted steel. But behind the anger, there was something else. The dawning realization that she had been caught. The evening sun cast long shadows in the hallway as the confrontation reached its tipping point. What had started as a simple security measure had unexpectedly pulled James into a neighborhood drama he never asked for. And little did he know. This was just the beginning of what he would uncover about his new neighbor's activities. The two police officers stood in the hallway between apartments 403 and 404, caught in an increasingly awkward situation. Officer Rodriguez, the taller of the two, maintained a professional demeanor despite the circumstances. His partner, Officer Chen, kept his notepad out, jotting down the key points of this unusual dispute. "Ms. Stevenson?" Officer Rodriguez began carefully. "Are you telling us you've never set up your own internet service since moving in 3 years ago?" Karen's indignation seemed to falter for just a moment. Well, when I moved in, the internet was already working. I just assumed it was included in the rent." "Did your lease specifically state that internet was included?" Officer Chen asked, pen poised above his notepad. "I don't remember every little detail," Karen snapped. "But I've been using the same network for years without any problems until he moved in." She jabbed a finger toward James, who was standing quietly in his doorway. James cleared his throat. "I can show you my lease if that would help. It clearly states that tenants are responsible for setting up their own utilities, including internet service." "That won't be necessary right now," Officer Rodriguez said. "Ms. Stevenson, do you have a copy of your lease agreement handy?" Karen crossed her arms defensively. "It's somewhere in my files." "But that's not the point." "The point is that he cut off my internet access when I have important work to do." Officer Chen exchanged a glance with his partner. "Ma'am, if you've been connecting to Mr. Wilson's personal Wi-Fi network without his knowledge or permission, that's actually against the law." Karen's mouth fell open. "Against the law? That's absurd. It's just internet." "Unauthorized access to network services is considered theft of services," Officer Rodriguez explained patiently. "It's similar to connecting to someone's electricity or cable TV without paying for it." The color drained from Karen's face, but she quickly recovered. "Well, how was I supposed to know? There was no password when I moved in." James stepped forward slightly. "The router does have a password. It's printed on a sticker on the bottom of the device, but that doesn't mean it's a public network." Karen's eyes flashed with renewed anger. "Are you calling me a thief?" "This is outrageous. I want to speak to your supervisor," she said, turning to the officers. "I'm the victim here." Several doors along the hallway had cracked open by this point, curious neighbors peeking out to witness the commotion. An elderly man from 406 had stepped fully into the hallway, not bothering to hide his interest in the drama unfolding. Officer Rodriguez maintained his calm tone. "Ms. Stevenson, no one is officially accusing you of anything at this point. We're just trying to understand the situation." "I understand the situation perfectly," Karen retorted.
"He's trying to make me look bad in front of everyone."
She gestured wildly toward the neighboring apartments where faces quickly disappeared behind closing doors. James sighed quietly. This was not how he had planned to meet his neighbors. "Look, I didn't know it was you using my network. I just noticed unknown devices connected to my router and changed the password as a security measure." "Anyone would do the same." "Security measure!" Karen scoffed. "What exactly are you implying? That I was doing something wrong by using the internet?" Officer Chen interjected. "Ms. Stevenson, regardless of your intentions, using someone else's Wi-Fi without permission is problematic. It not only slows down their connection but also poses security risks for both parties." Karen's face flushed again. "I was just checking my email and watching Netflix. I wasn't hacking into his computer. When unauthorized users are on the same network, they potentially have access to shared files and devices," James explained. "It's a standard cybersecurity concern." "Oh, so now you're a cybersecurity expert?" Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Next, you'll be telling me I stole state secrets." Officer Rodriguez held up a hand to prevent the situation from escalating further. "All right, let's take a step back here. Mr. Wilson, you've changed your Wi-Fi password, correct?" James nodded. "Yes, this afternoon." "And Ms. Stevenson, you need internet access for your work?" Karen lifted her chin. "Yes, I have an important Zoom meeting in—" She checked her watch and gasped. 5 minutes. "See what you've done?" She glared at James. Officer Rodriguez sighed. "Ms. Stevenson, I would recommend contacting an internet service provider to set up your own account. Most companies can get you connected within a day or two." "A day or two?" Karen's voice rose to a near shriek. "That's completely unacceptable. I need internet now." The elderly neighbor from 406 chose this moment to chime in. "You know, the community center down the street has free Wi-Fi. I use it all the time when my grandson visits." Karen whirled around to face him. Nobody asked you, Frank. The old man shrugged and retreated back into his apartment, closing the door with deliberate slowness. Officer Chen flipped his notepad closed. Ms. Stevenson, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to compel Mr. Wilson to share his private internet connection with you. This is ridiculous, Karen fumed. I pay good money to live in this building and I expect certain services. If you believe internet should be included in your rent, I suggest speaking with the building management, Officer Rodriguez advised. But for now, Mr. Wilson is within his rights to secure his own network. Karen's eyes narrowed as she stared at James. So that's it? He gets to just cut me off without any consequences? There are no consequences for someone protecting their own property, Officer Chen stated firmly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to wrap this up. We have other calls waiting. Karen wasn't ready to let it go. Well, what if he hacked into my devices while I was connected to his network? Did you even check his computer? He could have stolen my personal information. James had been maintaining his composure throughout the exchange, but this accusation pushed his patience to its limit. That's completely unfounded. I never accessed any of your devices. I didn't even know they belonged to you until you showed up at my door. Officer Rodriguez turned to Karen with a stern expression. Ms. Stevenson, making false accusations is a serious matter. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Wilson accessed your devices? Karen hesitated, then huffed. Well, no, but then I suggest you drop that line of argument, the officer interrupted. Now, is there anything else relevant to this situation that we need to address? Karen's jaw clenched as she realized she was losing this battle. With a sudden change in tactics, she straightened her posture and adopted a wounded expression. I just don't understand why he couldn't have been neighborly about this. A simple knock on my door to discuss the situation would have been the decent thing to do. James blinked in disbelief. I didn't know it was you using my network. The device names didn't indicate which apartment they belonged to. You could have asked around, Karen insisted. That's what good neighbors do. They communicate. Officer Chen raised an eyebrow. Like calling the police before attempting to resolve the issue directly? Karen's mouth snapped shut at that pointed observation. I think we're done here, Officer Rodriguez concluded. Ms. Stevenson, I recommend you contact an internet provider as soon as possible. Mr. Wilson, thank you for your cooperation. He handed each of them a card. If there are any further issues, please try to resolve them civilly before calling us again. As the officers prepared to leave, Karen made one last attempt. Wait, can't you at least make him share his password until I get my own internet set up? It's an emergency. Officer Rodriguez shook his head. That's between you and Mr. Wilson. We can't force anyone to share their private services. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Karen shot James a venomous look before storming back to her apartment, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the hallway light fixtures. The officers nodded respectfully to James before heading toward the elevator. James retreated into his apartment, closing the door with a weary sigh. He leaned against it for a moment, processing the surreal encounter. His phone chimed with a text notification. It was from his friend Tyrell. Hey man, how's the new place working out? Any interesting neighbors? James couldn't help but laugh at the timing. If only Tyrell knew. He was about to reply when his laptop pinged with an email notification. Opening it, he found a message from the building management company. Dear residents of Oakwood Apartments, it has come to our attention that there may be some confusion regarding utilities and services included in your lease. To clarify, each apartment is responsible for setting up and paying for their own internet service. The building does not provide shared Wi-Fi. If you have any questions about your lease agreement, please contact the management office during regular business hours. Thank you. Oakwood Management Team. James raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Someone must have contacted them already. He wondered if it was one of the neighbors who had witnessed the hallway confrontation. A sudden thought struck him. If Karen had been using his internet for who knows how long, what else might she have accessed? His router kept logs of network activity, and he decided it might be worth checking them more thoroughly. Opening his laptop, James navigated to the router's admin panel again. The activity logs showed 3 years' worth of connection history, far longer than the 2 weeks he'd lived there. The previous tenant must have used the same internet provider and router. As James scrolled through the logs, he noticed patterns of usage that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Late-night connections, unusual data transfers, access attempts to secure websites. This went beyond merely borrowing Wi-Fi for Netflix. A knock at his door interrupted his investigation. With a wary expression, James approached the door and looked through the peephole. It wasn't Karen this time, but the elderly neighbor from across the hall. James opened the door cautiously. "Hello?" Frank offered a sympathetic smile. "Just wanted to check if you're doing okay after all that commotion." Karen can be intense. "I'm fine, thanks," James replied. Just a bit surprised by how quickly things escalated. Frank nodded knowingly. She's been causing trouble since she moved in. Always claiming special privileges, reporting people for the smallest things. He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, she got the previous tenant in your apartment kicked out with some bogus noise complaints." James frowned. "Really? That's concerning." "Just watch your back," Frank advised. "And maybe invest in a good security camera for your door. Several of us have had to do the same." "I appreciate the warning," James said sincerely. Frank patted him on the shoulder. "Welcome to Oakwood, son. Not all of us are like her, I promise." With a friendly wave, he shuffled back to his own apartment. James closed the door, his mind racing with this new information. The confrontation over Wi-Fi suddenly seemed like it might be just the tip of the iceberg. If Karen had targeted the previous tenant and was now focusing on him, what might she do next? He returned to his laptop, more determined than ever to understand exactly what had been happening on his network. As the evening deepened into night, James dug deeper into the router logs, uncovering activity that sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just about borrowed bandwidth anymore. The evidence on his screen suggested something far more troubling, something that would turn this neighborly dispute into a much more serious situation. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds as James sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen. He'd been up half the night diving into his router logs, and what he found left him deeply unsettled. The data showed someone had been accessing his network almost daily for months before he moved in, often during odd hours. He rubbed his tired eyes and took another sip of coffee. This whole situation had gone from annoying to concerning. A neighbor borrowing Wi-Fi was one thing, but the pattern of activity suggested something more deliberate. A knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. Cautiously, he approached and looked through the peephole. It was Diane, the building manager, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," she said when he opened the door. "I hope I'm not disturbing you too early." "Not at all," James replied, although he hadn't expected visitors before 9 a.m. "What can I do for you?" Diane adjusted her glasses. "I received some concerning reports about an incident yesterday involving the police. Since it happened on property grounds, I need to follow up. May I come in?" James stepped aside to let her enter. "Of course. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you. This shouldn't take long." She took a seat at his kitchen table, pulling out a small notebook. "So, can you tell me what happened?" James sat across from her and explained the situation, discovering unknown devices on his network, changing his password, and Karen's unexpected reaction culminating in the police visit. Diane listened attentively, occasionally making notes. When James finished, she sighed deeply. "I was afraid of something like this. Ms. Stevenson has been challenging since she moved in." "Frank mentioned she had issues with the previous tenant in this apartment," James said carefully. "That's putting it mildly," Diane replied. "Mr. Chen left 3 months before his lease ended because of her constant complaints. But this Wi-Fi situation is new." She tapped her pen against the notebook. "Are you certain she was using your network?" James turned his laptop around. "I have the logs right here. These device names match what she admitted to having when the police were here." Diane leaned forward to examine the screen. "This shows connection history going back long before you moved in." "Yes, the router was already installed by the previous tenant who used the same internet provider. When I signed up, they just transferred the service to my name." Diane's brow furrowed. "So Ms. Stevenson has potentially been using this connection for at least 3 years based on the logs," James finished. "Possibly since she moved in." "Well, that explains a few things," Diane muttered. "We've had several tenants in this unit over the years, and Ms. Stevenson has had conflicts with each one. I always assumed it was personality clashes, but if she was dependent on accessing their Wi-Fi," James nodded. "It would explain why she was so upset when I changed the password." Diane closed her notebook. "Mr. Wilson, I want to apologize for this situation. It's completely unacceptable. I've already sent out a building-wide reminder about our internet policy, but I'll have a direct conversation with Ms. Stevenson today. I appreciate that, James said. I just want to live here peacefully, as you should be able to. Diane stood up. If you experience any further issues, please contact me immediately. Don't wait for things to escalate. After Diane left, James took a shower and tried to refocus on work, but his concentration kept drifting back to the router logs and the strange patterns he'd noticed. On a hunch, he decided to check if any of his personal cloud accounts had been accessed during the time before he moved in. He logged into his Google account first and checked the activity. Nothing unusual there. Next, he tried his Dropbox where he kept most of his work files. The recent activity seemed normal at first glance, until he noticed logins from an unfamiliar IP address. The address matched the one assigned to Karen's devices in his router logs. James felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Someone had accessed his Dropbox multiple times in the past month. How was this possible? He hadn't even set up his computer in the new apartment until 2 weeks ago. Then it hit him. The previous tenant must have used the same account or had similar credentials. Perhaps Karen had captured login information through the shared network. His phone rang, interrupting his troubled thoughts. It was Tyrell. Hey man, how's it going with the new place? You never texted me back yesterday. Sorry about that, James replied, grateful for the distraction. Things got a bit crazy here. Crazy how? Party with the new neighbors already? James laughed humorlessly. Not exactly. One of my neighbors called the cops on me for changing my Wi-Fi password. Wait, what? You're kidding. Wish I was. James proceeded to tell Tyrell the whole story, including his growing concerns about the router logs and the Dropbox access. Tyrell, who worked in cybersecurity, immediately went into professional mode. Dude, this is serious. If she's been on the same network for years, she could have accessed all kinds of personal information from previous tenants. You need to document everything. I've been taking screenshots of the logs, James said. Good, but that's not enough. You should contact the internet provider too. They might have additional records. And you should probably file a report about the unauthorized access to your Dropbox. You think it's that serious? Identity theft is no joke, Tyrell said firmly. And from what you're telling me about this woman, she sounds unhinged enough to try something petty if she feels cornered. After hanging up, James followed Tyrell's advice and called his internet provider. The customer service representative confirmed his suspicions. The service had been continuously active at his address for nearly 4 years, transferred between tenants as they moved in and out. Can you tell me if there were any unusual access patterns or complaints from previous account holders? James asked. I don't see any official complaints, but there are notes about bandwidth usage spikes that didn't match the customer's typical patterns, the representative replied. The previous tenant had called several times about slow speeds despite paying for premium service. James thanked her and made a note of the case number for reference. Next, he contacted Dropbox support to report the unauthorized access and changed all his passwords just to be safe. As he was finishing up, a loud knock rattled his door. Through the peephole, he saw Karen standing in the hallway, arms crossed. James considered ignoring her, but decided it was better to address whatever new complaint she had directly. Yes, he said calmly as he opened the door. Karen's expression was a mixture of anger and forced politeness. The building manager just left my apartment. She says I need to get my own internet service. That's correct, James replied, keeping his tone neutral. Each apartment is responsible for their own utilities. Well, it's going to take 3 days for the technician to come set it up, she said, her voice tight. I have important work meetings until then. Ames waited, suspecting where this was heading but not willing to make it easier for her. I need to use your Wi-Fi until my service is installed, she finally stated, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. I don't think that's a good idea, James said firmly. Karen's fake smile vanished. Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot yesterday, but this is a real emergency. I could lose my job if I miss these meetings. There's a coffee shop around the corner with free Wi-Fi, James suggested, or the community center that Frank mentioned. Those aren't secure connections. I handle sensitive client information. The irony of her sudden concern for security wasn't lost on James. I understand your predicament, but after what happened yesterday, I'm not comfortable sharing my network. Karen's face darkened. Is this because I called the police? I was just concerned about potential hacking. You should understand that being what exactly? James asked, his voice cooling several degrees. Karen faltered under his steady gaze. Being in tech, I mean. You understand security concerns. Yes, I do understand security concerns. That's precisely why I changed my password when I found unauthorized devices on my network. Karen switched tactics, her expression morphing into one of pitiful desperation. Please, I'm begging you. Just for 3 days. I'll even pay you. James remained unmoved. I'm sorry, but my answer is no. You should have set up your own internet years ago instead of using other people's connections without permission. Karen's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this. Do you know how many people I know in this building? In this neighborhood? I'm on the HOA board. Are you threatening me? James asked quietly. I'm just stating facts, Karen snapped. People look out for each other here, or at least they used to before people like you started moving in. The thinly veiled prejudice in her comment made James's jaw clench, but he kept his composure. I think this conversation is over. Good luck with your internet installation. He began to close the door, but Karen stuck her foot in the way. Wait, what about my devices? Did you mess with them when they were connected to your network? I never accessed any of your devices, James stated firmly. But I did notice someone accessed my Dropbox account from your IP address. Would you know anything about that? Karen's eyes widened momentarily before she recovered. I don't even know what a Dropbox is. Are you accusing me of hacking now? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, James replied. I'm simply investigating unauthorized access to my accounts. Now please remove your foot so I can close my door. Karen reluctantly pulled her foot back. This isn't over, she warned before storming back to her apartment. James closed his door, making sure to engage both locks. Karen's reaction to his mention of Dropbox troubled him. There had been a flash of recognition, or was it guilt? In her eyes. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Ms. Stevenson just called to file a complaint against you for harassment. I informed her that her claims are unfounded, based on our earlier conversation. Please document any further interactions with her. James sighed and typed back a quick thanks along with a brief summary of Karen's recent visit. This situation was escalating in ways he hadn't anticipated when he simply changed his Wi-Fi password. Later that afternoon, James decided to do a more thorough check of his digital accounts. He logged into his email and searched through recent activity. Nothing unusual there. Then he checked his cloud storage services one by one. When he got to his personal OneDrive account, he noticed something odd. There was a folder he didn't remember creating labeled Application Materials. Inside were copies of his resume, professional certifications, and even his university transcripts, all documents he kept securely stored but rarely accessed. What was stranger still was that the folder showed it had been accessed repeatedly over the past few months, long before he moved into the apartment. The most recent access was just 2 days ago. A chill ran down James's spine as he dug deeper. The folder contained not just his original documents, but edited versions with subtle changes. His resume had been altered to change his name while keeping all his qualifications and work history intact. His professional headshot had been replaced with someone else's photo. What the hell? He muttered, scrolling through the modified documents with growing disbelief. The implications were staggering. Someone had been using his professional credentials, his work history, his qualifications, his identity for their own purposes. And based on the access logs and IP addresses, all signs pointed to Karen. James immediately took screenshots of everything, documenting the unauthorized access and the altered documents. He changed his OneDrive password and enabled two-factor authentication on all his accounts. His phone rang again. It was Terrell. Hey, I've been thinking about your situation, his friend said without preamble. Something feels off about it. This Karen woman's reaction seems extreme, even for someone caught using someone else's Wi-Fi. You have no idea, James replied grimly. I just found something much worse. He explained his discovery about the altered documents. Terrell whistled low. That's identity theft, man. You need to report this to the real police, not just the officers who responded to her bogus call. I know, James agreed. I'm gathering all the evidence first. Be careful, Terrell warned. If she's been doing this for years, She might get desperate when cornered. After hanging up, James continued his investigation with renewed purpose. He checked his credit report for any unusual activity and was relieved to find nothing suspicious. At least Karen hadn't opened financial accounts in his name. But as he dug deeper into his OneDrive access logs, he found something that made his blood run cold. There were email threads saved in a subfolder, correspondence between James Wilson and several tech companies, including some where he had actually applied recently. The emails showed someone posing as him had scheduled interviews, discussed salary expectations, and even declined offers, all without his knowledge. The most recent email was from yesterday, confirming an interview for a position he had never applied for. James sat back in his chair, trying to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. This wasn't just about stolen Wi-Fi anymore. This was a systematic effort to hijack his professional identity. A soft knock at his door jolted him from his thoughts. Through the peephole, he saw Frank, the elderly neighbor, looking concerned. "Sorry to bother you," Frank said when James opened the door, "but I thought you should know that Karen is telling everyone in the building that you're some kind of hacker who stole her identity." He shook his head in disgust. "She's called an emergency tenant meeting for tonight to discuss security concerns in the building." James felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. "She's the one who's been stealing my identity." Frank raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" James hesitated, then decided Frank had proven himself trustworthy so far. "I've found evidence that she's been using my professional credentials to apply for jobs and schedule interviews." Frank's eyes widened. "That explains a lot, actually. She's always bragging about job offers from big tech companies, but she never seems to actually take any of them." He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, some of us have wondered how she affords her lifestyle. She drives a nice car and takes expensive vacations, but as far as anyone knows, she hasn't had a steady job in years." James frowned. "Has she done this before? Targeted other tenants?" "There have been rumors," Frank admitted. "The last guy in your unit, Mr. Chen, left suddenly after his identity was stolen. Everyone assumed it was bad luck, but now..." James felt a growing sense of urgency. "I need to report this to the police and warn the building manager about this meeting tonight." Frank nodded. "I'll keep an ear out and let you know if I hear anything else. And James, you might want to install that security camera sooner rather than later." As Frank walked away, James closed his door, his mind racing. What had started as a simple Wi-Fi password change had uncovered something far more sinister. Karen wasn't just an entitled neighbor. She was potentially a serial identity thief who had been targeting tenants in his unit for years. He picked up his phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. It was time to turn the tables on Karen Stevenson. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into when she decided to call 911 over a Wi-Fi password. Detective Lisa Patel sat across from James in the small interview room at the police station, reviewing the evidence he had brought. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a crisp button-down shirt under her blazer. She had been taking notes for the past 20 minutes as James explained the situation. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, looking up from her notepad. "You changed your Wi-Fi password? Your neighbor called 911 claiming you were hacking her? And then you discovered evidence suggesting she's been stealing your professional identity?" "Yes," James confirmed, "and possibly the identities of previous tenants in my apartment." Detective Patel flipped through the printouts of James's OneDrive logs, the altered resumes, and the email correspondence conducted in his name. "This is concerning, Mr. Wilson. Identity theft is a serious crime. The evidence you've provided certainly warrants further investigation. What happens next?" James asked. "Jay will need to obtain warrants to examine Ms. Stevenson's devices and financial records," she explained. "In the meantime, I recommend you continue to monitor your accounts and report any new suspicious activity. There's also the emergency tenant meeting she's organized for tonight," James added. "She's telling people I'm the one who stole her identity." Detective Patel frowned. "Classic deflection tactic. I'd advise you to attend that meeting but refrain from making accusations. Let her talk while we build our case." She handed him her card. "Call me directly if she makes any specific threats or if the situation escalates." James nodded, feeling some relief that the police were taking his case seriously. "Thank you, Detective." "One more thing," she said as James stood to leave. "Does Ms. Stevenson know you've discovered the altered documents and unauthorized access?" I mentioned that someone had accessed my Dropbox from her IP address, but I didn't tell her about the OneDrive or the fake job applications, James replied. Good. The less she knows about our investigation, the better. Detective Patel closed her folder. We'll be in touch soon, Mr. Wilson. On his way home, James stopped at an electronics store and purchased a small security camera for his apartment door, following Frank's advice. He also bought a new external hard drive to back up all his digital evidence. When he arrived back at Oakwood Apartments, the lobby was buzzing with activity. A handwritten notice on the community board announced, "Emergency tenant meeting tonight. 7 p.m. Security concerns. All residents should attend." James checked his watch, almost 6 p.m. He had just enough time to set up his new security camera before heading down to the meeting. As he approached his apartment, he noticed Karen standing in the hallway, talking animatedly to a middle-aged couple James hadn't met yet. She fell silent when she saw him, giving him a cold stare as he walked past. Inside his apartment, James quickly installed the camera, positioning it to capture his door and part of the hallway. The setup was simple: motion-activated recording with alerts sent directly to his phone. At 7 p.m. sharp, James walked down to the community room in the basement. About 20 residents had already gathered, sitting in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. Karen stood at the front, distributing printed handouts. James took a seat near the back, nodding politely to Frank, who was sitting nearby. A few residents gave him curious glances. Clearly, word had spread about the Wi-Fi incident. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Karen began once everyone was seated. "I've called this meeting because I believe we have a serious security concern in our building." She paused dramatically, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on James. "As some of you may have heard, there was an incident yesterday involving unauthorized access to private networks. The police were called, but unfortunately, they didn't take the matter as seriously as they should have." Several residents shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, looking between Karen and James. "I've prepared some information about how to protect yourselves from cyber threats," Karen continued, holding up her handouts. "Because sadly, we can never be too careful about who moves into our community." The implication was clear, and James felt a surge of anger at her thinly veiled accusation. But remembering Detective Patel's advice, he kept his expression neutral. "In the past month alone, I've experienced suspicious activity on my personal accounts," Karen went on. "Credit card applications I never filled out, email, password reset attempts, and strange charges on my bank statement." James struggled to maintain his composure. She was describing exactly what she had been doing to him and possibly others, but flipping the narrative. Diane, the building manager, raised her hand. "Karen, are you suggesting another tenant is responsible for these issues?" "I'm not naming names," Karen replied with false diplomacy, "but the problem started very recently, coinciding with certain new arrivals." She glanced pointedly at James. Frank cleared his throat loudly. "That's interesting, Karen, because I recall you mentioning similar problems last year when the Thompson family moved in, and before that, when Mr. Chen was here." Several residents nodded in agreement, and Karen's confidence seemed to falter momentarily. "Those were different situations," she insisted. "This time I have evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Diane asked skeptically. Karen fumbled with a folder she had brought. "Well, I can't share all the details because the police are investigating, but..." James's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a security alert from his new door camera. He discreetly checked the notification and froze. The camera had captured someone trying to enter his apartment, and that someone was clearly visible in the video feed. It was Karen's teenage son, Tommy, attempting to pick the lock on James's door. James immediately texted the video to Detective Patel with the message, "Karen Stevenson's son trying to break into my apartment right now. I'm at the tenant meeting she organized as a distraction." Detective Patel replied almost instantly, "Officers en route. Stay where you are." James looked up from his phone to find Karen staring at him suspiciously. "Is there something more interesting on your phone than our community safety, Mr. Wilson?" Before James could respond, Diane intervened. Karen, I think we need to be careful about making accusations without proper evidence. If residents are experiencing cybersecurity issues, they should report them to the police individually. That's exactly what I did, Karen said defensively. But they didn't take my concerns seriously. Perhaps because they found no evidence to support your claims, Frank suggested mildly. Karen's face flushed. You don't know what you're talking about, Frank. You can barely operate your TV remote, let alone understand cybersecurity threats. The meeting was descending into chaos when James's phone buzzed again. Detective Patel. Subject apprehended. Officers securing your apartment. Please come up when safe to do so. James stood quietly and walked toward the exit. Where do you think you're going? Karen demanded. We're not finished here. Actually, I think we are, James replied calmly. The police need me upstairs. A confused murmur spread through the room as James left. When he reached his floor, he found two uniformed officers standing in the hallway with Tommy, who looked terrified. Detective Patel was examining the lock on James's door. Mr. Wilson, she greeted him. Your timing with that security camera couldn't have been better. Tommy here was just explaining why he was trying to enter your apartment. The teenager, who couldn't have been more than 16, looked at the floor. Mom said I needed to get her stuff back, he mumbled. What stuff would that be? Detective Patel asked. Tommy shrugged uncomfortably. Some papers and files from the computer. She said he stole them from her and we needed to get them back before he deleted them. James exchanged a look with Detective Patel. They both understood what Karen had been trying to do, retrieve or destroy evidence of her identity theft. Tommy, is your mother still downstairs at the meeting? Detective Patel asked. The teenager nodded miserably. Officer Rivera, please go down and ask Ms. Stevenson to join us, Detective Patel instructed one of the uniformed officers. Don't mention we have her son or that we know about the break-in attempt. Just say we need to speak with her regarding a complaint. As Officer Rivera headed toward the elevator, Detective Patel turned to James. We'll need to check your apartment for any signs of previous entry. Is that all right with you? Of course, James agreed, unlocking his door. Inside, everything appeared untouched. Tommy hadn't managed to get in this time, but James wondered if Karen had accessed his apartment before, perhaps when he was at work. It would explain how she obtained some of his personal documents that weren't stored digitally. Based on what we've discovered, I'm going to request an emergency search warrant for Ms. Stevenson's apartment, Detective Patel informed him. The attempted break-in, combined with the evidence you provided earlier, gives us sufficient probable cause. A commotion in the hallway announced Karen's arrival. What is going on here? She demanded, then froze when she saw Tommy with the officers. Tommy, what are you doing here? I told you to stay at home. Ms. Stevenson, Detective Patel said. Formally, your son was caught attempting to break into Mr. Wilson's apartment. He claims you instructed him to retrieve certain documents. Karen's face went pale, then flushed deep red. That's ridiculous. Tommy, tell them the truth. The teenager looked miserable. I did tell them the truth, Mom. You said we needed to get your files back before he deleted them. I never said any such thing, Karen protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Detective Patel stepped forward. Ms. Stevenson, we have video evidence of the attempted break-in, and your son's statement corroborates what we already suspected based on Mr. Wilson's earlier report. What report? What are you talking about? Karen's voice rose in panic. Mr. Wilson came to the station today with evidence suggesting you've been using his professional identity to apply for jobs and schedule interviews, Detective Patel explained. We're also investigating whether you did the same to previous tenants in his unit. Karen's expression cycled rapidly between shock, anger, and fear. That's absurd. He's the one who's been hacking into my accounts. That's why I called the police yesterday. Mr. Stevenson, we have logs showing unauthorized access to Mr. Wilson's cloud storage accounts from your IP address, dating back months before he even moved in, Detective Patel continued calmly. We also have evidence of altered resumes and fabricated correspondence with potential employers. Karen's facade finally cracked. You don't understand, she said, her voice quavering. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just needed better opportunities. By stealing other people's qualifications and work histories? James asked incredulously. Karen avoided his gaze. You don't know what it's like. I lost my job 3 years ago. Nobody would hire a middle-aged woman with outdated skills. But when I used your credentials just to get my foot in the door, companies were suddenly interested. So you admit to using Mr. Wilson's professional identity without his permission? Detective Patel clarified. Realizing her mistake, Karen backpedaled. I didn't say that. I was speaking hypothetically. Mom, stop lying, Tommy said quietly. I know what you've been doing. I've seen the fake resumes on your computer. Karen stared at her son in shock. Tommy, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. Actually, I think he does, Detective Patel said. Mrs. Stevenson, based on the attempted break-in and the evidence we've gathered, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted burglary and identity theft. We'll also be obtaining a warrant to search your apartment and electronic devices. As Officer Rivera read Karen her rights, residents from the tenant meeting began to emerge from the elevator, drawn by the commotion. They watched in stunned silence as Karen was handcuffed and escorted toward the elevator. This is all a misunderstanding, she called out desperately. He's framing me. He's the criminal, not me. No one responded. The facade she had maintained for years was crumbling before their eyes. Once Karen had been taken downstairs, Detective Patel turned to Tommy. Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? Your father or another relative? The teenager nodded. My dad lives in the city. I can call him. Please do that, Detective Patel said gently. Officer Chen will stay with you until he arrives. After Tommy and Officer Chen moved down the hall to make the call, Detective Patel addressed James. We'll need you to come by the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. In the meantime, I suggest you continue monitoring your accounts and changing any passwords you haven't updated yet. I will, James promised. Thank you for taking this seriously. Identity theft is never something we take lightly, she assured him. What Ms. Stevenson did was calculated and deliberate. Based on Tommy's statement and what we already know, I suspect we'll find evidence of multiple victims once we examine her devices. After Detective Patel left, the hallway filled with curious neighbors asking James what had happened. He gave them a simplified version, explaining that Karen had been using his internet without permission and had attempted to access his apartment when he changed the password. Most seemed unsurprised by Karen's behavior. Several shared their own stories of strange encounters with her over the years. Frank patted James on the shoulder. You did the right thing, son. Some of us suspected something wasn't right with her, but we never had proof. As the crowd dispersed, James returned to his apartment, feeling emotionally drained, but relieved. What had started with a simple Wi-Fi password change had uncovered a years-long scheme of identity theft and fraud. He still had questions about the full extent of Karen's activities, but those would have to wait until the police completed their investigation. For now, he was content knowing that his quick thinking and thorough documentation had stopped her from continuing her schemes. As he settled on his couch, his phone pinged with a text from Tyrell. How did the tenant meeting go? James smiled tiredly as he typed his reply. Let's just say Karen won't be borrowing anyone's Wi-Fi for a while. 3 weeks had passed since Karen's arrest, and life at Oakwood Apartments had settled into a peaceful rhythm. James sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee and reviewing the email Detective Patel had sent him last night. The investigation into Karen Stevenson had uncovered far more than anyone expected. After obtaining search warrants for her apartment, the police found dozens of stolen identities, not just from current and former Oakwood residents, but from previous neighbors, co-workers, and even casual acquaintances. Karen had maintained meticulous files on each person, complete with stolen credentials, personal information, and detailed notes on how she had used their identities. James scrolled through the detective's summary with a mix of relief and disbelief. Karen had been running her scheme for over 5 years, targeting primarily people in technical or professional fields with impressive credentials. She would use their Wi-Fi networks to access their devices, steal their personal and professional information, and then create altered versions of their resumes and portfolios to apply for high-paying jobs. The most disturbing part was how she monetized these stolen identities. She never actually took the jobs herself. Instead, she would go through the interview process, receive job offers, and then negotiate signing bonuses before backing out at the last minute. Some companies had paid her thousands of dollars in signing bonuses for positions she never intended to fill. In James's case, she had been particularly bold, scheduling 3 interviews using his credentials in the short time since he had moved in. One company had already offered him a position with a $15,000 signing bonus, which Karen had been in the process of negotiating when she was arrested. A knock at his door interrupted his reading. Through the peephole, he saw Frank standing in the hallway, newspaper tucked under his arm. "Morning, James." The older man greeted him when he opened the door. "Thought you might want to see this." He handed over the local newspaper, folded open to a specific page. It made the news. The headline read, "Local woman charged in elaborate identity theft scheme." Below was Karen's mugshot and a brief summary of the case. "Wow," James said, skimming the article. "They're not holding back on the details." "Nor should they," Frank replied. "She had the whole building fooled for years. Makes you wonder how many other Karens are out there, living double lives right under our noses." James invited Frank in for coffee, and they sat discussing the case. According to the article, Karen was facing multiple felony charges, including identity theft, wire fraud, and attempted burglary. Her son Tommy had gone to live with his father and was cooperating with the investigation. "Have you heard from any of the companies she applied to using your name?" Frank asked. James nodded. "3 so far. Detective Patel helped me contact them to explain the situation. They were surprisingly understanding once they realized I was the victim, not the perpetrator." "That's good. Don't need that kind of thing affecting your reputation." James's phone chimed with a text notification. It was from Terrell. "You free for dinner tonight? Got some news to share." "Speaking of reputations," James said, setting down his phone, "I've been thinking about starting a cybersecurity awareness group for the building. Just basic stuff. How to create strong passwords, recognize phishing attempts, secure your home network. After what happened with Karen, I think people might be more receptive." Frank nodded approvingly. "That's a great idea. Turn something negative into a positive." After Frank left, James finished reading Detective Patel's email. The final paragraphs contained information about the upcoming court proceedings and asked if James would be willing to testify if the case went to trial. He replied immediately that he would do whatever was necessary to ensure Karen faced consequences for her actions. Later that afternoon, James met with Diane, the building manager, to discuss his idea for the cybersecurity awareness group. She was enthusiastic about the proposal. After what happened with Ms. Stevenson, residents are definitely more concerned about their digital security, she confirmed. "We could use the community room for monthly workshops. I can even include a notice in the building newsletter." "Perfect," James said. "I was thinking of starting with basic home network security, since that's what kicked off this whole situation." "Speaking of which," Diane said, lowering her voice slightly, "we've received several complaints from former residents who lived in your unit before you. They believe Ms. Stevenson may have targeted them as well." "I'm not surprised," James replied. Detective Patel mentioned they found evidence related to multiple former tenants. Diane shook her head sadly. "It's troubling to think this went on for so long without anyone connecting the dots. Ms. Stevenson was so convincing with her community involvement and her position on the HOA board. No one suspected she was using that access to target her neighbors. That's often how it works," James explained. "The people who seem the most above suspicion sometimes have the most to hide." That evening, James met Tyrell at their favorite restaurant downtown. His friend was already seated at their usual booth, grinning broadly. "So what's this news you couldn't share over text?" James asked after they ordered. Tyrell leaned forward excitedly. "Remember that cybersecurity startup I interviewed with last month? They offered me the job. I start in 2 weeks." "That's fantastic." James clinked his glass against Tyrell's. "Congratulations. You've been talking about making that move for ages." "Thanks, man. And get this. They asked if I knew any other talented engineers looking for a change." Tyrell gave him a meaningful look. "I might have mentioned your name." James raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah?" Their chief security officer was impressed by how you handled the whole Karen situation. Said it showed good instincts and attention to detail. Tyrell slid a business card across the table. "She wants you to call her if you're interested." James picked up the card, turning it over in his fingers thoughtfully. He hadn't been looking to change jobs, but after the events of the past month, the idea of working in cybersecurity had a certain appeal. His experience with Karen had shown him firsthand how vulnerable people could be, and how important it was to have professionals dedicated to protecting them. "I'll think about it," he promised, tucking the card into his wallet as they ate. Tyrell asked for more details about the investigation. James shared what he'd learned from Detective Patel's email and the newspaper article. "The craziest part," James said, shaking his head, "is that she was living quite comfortably off these signing bonuses. According to the detective, Karen collected over $200,000 in the past 3 years alone. All while using other people's credentials to get those offers." Tyrell marveled. "You have to admit it's a clever scam. Morally bankrupt, but clever. The companies never suspected anything because she used legitimate credentials from real people with verifiable work histories," James explained. "She just changed the contact information and photo. By the time they realized the person who showed up for the job wasn't the same person they interviewed remotely, she'd already cashed the signing bonus and disappeared," Tyrell finished. "Diabolical." After dinner, James returned to his apartment to find an email from one of the companies Karen had contacted using his credentials. The HR director explained that while they understood he wasn't responsible for the fraudulent application, they had been genuinely impressed by his qualifications. If he was interested in interviewing for the position legitimately, they would like to speak with him. James smiled at the irony. Karen's scheme had backfired completely, potentially opening doors for him that he hadn't even been looking for. The next morning, a Saturday, James was preparing materials for his first cybersecurity workshop when his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, he saw Tommy, Karen's son, standing nervously in the hallway. The teenager was accompanied by an older man who James assumed was his father. When James opened the door, Tommy stepped forward awkwardly. "Hi, Mr. Wilson. I wanted to apologize for trying to break into your apartment, and for everything my mom did to you." James was surprised by the unexpected visit but appreciated the gesture. "Thank you, Tommy. That takes courage." The older man extended his hand. "I'm David Stevenson, Tommy's father. I wanted to make sure he had the chance to apologize in person. What Karen did was inexcusable, and I'm trying to teach him that actions have consequences." James shook David's hand. "I appreciate that. How are you holding up, Tommy?" The teenager shrugged. "Okay, I guess. Living with Dad now. It's different, but good." He hesitated, then added, "I didn't know what Mom was doing, not really. I mean, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't understand how serious it was." "Kids shouldn't have to worry about their parents' legal problems," James said kindly. "That's not on you." David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "We're also here because Tommy has a community service requirement as part of his diversion program. He needs to complete 50 hours to avoid having this incident on his permanent record." "I was thinking," Tommy said, looking more animated, "maybe I could help with your cybersecurity workshops. Dad said you're starting them soon. I'm pretty good with computers and I could, set up the projector and stuff." James considered the offer. Having Tommy involved could be beneficial for everyone. The teenager would learn valuable lessons about digital ethics while fulfilling his community service, and James could use the assistance with the technical setup. "That sounds like a great idea," James agreed. "In fact, you might be able to help me reach the younger residents in the building who might not attend otherwise." Tommy's face brightened. "Really? That would be awesome." They worked out a schedule for Tommy to help with the workshops, and David thanked James for giving his son this opportunity. "He's a good kid who made a bad choice because of his mother's influence," David explained after Tommy stepped into the hallway. "I'm trying to keep him on the right path." "We all make mistakes," James said. "What matters is how we learn from them." After they left, James returned to preparing his workshop materials with renewed enthusiasm. What had begun as a nightmare, a neighbor calling the police over a Wi-Fi password, had transformed into an opportunity to make a positive impact on his community. Over the next few months, James's cybersecurity workshops became increasingly popular among the Oakwood residents. People who had previously been wary of technology began to feel more confident in protecting their digital lives. Tommy proved to be an excellent assistant, particularly skilled at explaining concepts to older residents in terms they could understand. The case against Karen proceeded through the legal system. She eventually accepted a plea deal that included significant restitution to her victims, 5 years in prison, and a lengthy probation period with strict monitoring of her digital activities. The companies she had defrauded were also pursuing civil cases against her. 6 months after the Wi-Fi incident, James sat in the office of the chief security officer at the company Terrell had recommended. After several interviews, they had offered him a position leading their new consumer education division, focused on helping ordinary people protect themselves from identity theft and cybercrime. Your experience gives you a unique perspective, the CSO explained. You understand firsthand what victims go through, and you've already demonstrated your ability to translate complex security concepts for non-technical audiences through your community workshops. James accepted the offer, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't expected to find from such an unpleasant experience. He had turned a personal violation into a professional calling. That evening, as he shared the news with Terrell over drinks, his friend raised his glass in a toast. To Karen, Terrell said with a wry smile, who had no idea what she was setting in motion when she called 911 over a Wi-Fi password. James laughed and clinked his glass against Tyrell's. To unintended consequences and the fresh starts they sometimes bring. As he walked home, through the crisp autumn air, James reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. A simple act of securing his network had uncovered a criminal enterprise, brought a community together, and ultimately led him to a new career path. Outside Oakwood Apartments, he noticed a new sign posted prominently near the entrance. Secure building, security cameras in operation, cybersecurity awareness community. Frank was watering plants on his balcony and waved when he spotted James. There he is, our local security expert. How's it going, son? James waved back with a smile. Never better, Frank, never better. He entered the building, greeted by neighbors who now knew him not as the man involved in the Wi-Fi incident, but as someone who had helped make their community safer. In his apartment, he settled at his desk and opened his laptop to finalize the outline for next week's workshop on password managers. His phone chimed with a message from Detective Patel. Thought you'd want to know. 3 more companies have come forward with cases similar to yours. Your documentation helped establish the pattern. Thanks again for your thoroughness. James smiled as he typed his reply. The ripple effects of his actions continued to spread, bringing justice to other victims and preventing future ones, all because he noticed unknown devices on his network and decided to change his Wi-Fi password. Sometimes the smallest changes led to the biggest revelations. And sometimes the people who called the police on you had no idea what they were really setting in motion.